When the food system cracks, not for a season, not for a year, but for the long haul, the people who make it aren't the ones with the biggest stockpile. Stockpiles run out. What doesn't run out is a garden full of perennials, not annuals, not crops you baby every spring with seeds, fertilizer, and prayers that the frost holds off. Perennials. The crops you put in the ground once and walk away from. Crops that come back next year and the year after that. And the year after that, producing real food while you're focused on everything else that survival demands. Most gardeners are still treating their food plot like a hobby. Tomatoes in June, dead in October, back to square one every March. That cycle costs you time, money, and energy you may not always have. Perennials break that cycle permanently. This list covers 12 crops chosen for one reason above all else. They keep producing without you. They survive neglect, poor soil, drought, cold snaps, and forgotten seasons. They work across growing zones 3 through 8, meaning the vast majority of North America. And once they're established, they don't ask anything from you. If you're watching this, you already understand that depending on grocery store supply chains indefinitely isn't a plan. So hit subscribe right now, because by the time most people figure that out, you'll already be harvesting while they're standing in empty aisles. Let's start at the bottom. Number 12. Number 12, lovage. The forgotten perennial that grows 6 feet of food every year. Most people have never heard of lovage. That's the whole point. Lovage, Levisticum officinale, is a towering perennial herb that's been used across Europe for centuries as food, medicine, and livestock feed. It fell out of fashion when industrial agriculture made it easier to grow a monoculture of one thing and ship it everywhere. But in a world where that system breaks down, lovage becomes exactly the kind of crop that matters most. Productive, low maintenance, and completely self-sufficient. Here's what makes it remarkable. Lovage tastes like intense celery, earthy, savory, slightly peppery. Every part of the plant is edible. The leaves are used like herbs or cooked greens. The hollow stems can replace celery in soups and stews. The seeds are used as a spice. The roots, thick, deep, aromatic, have been used medicinally for generations. You plant one root crown and within 2 years, you have a 6-foot perennial, producing more usable food material per square foot than almost anything else in your garden. It's cold hardy down to zone 3. It tolerates partial shade, making it useful in spots where other crops fail. It comes back every spring from its deep root system without any intervention from you. And because it grows so aggressively, a single mature plant will feed a family's seasoning and cooking green needs for an entire season. Here's the practical angle. In a long-term survival scenario, flavor compounds and nutrients from aromatic plants become irreplaceable. When your diet is stripped down to root crops and dried legumes, a handful of lovage leaves transforms a pot of beans into a meal that keeps morale intact. Morale matters more than most survival content admits. Plant crowns in early spring in a spot with full sun or light shade. Give it decent drainage and space 3 feet on all sides, because it will use it. Mulch around the base. Then leave it alone. It will die back to the ground in winter and re-emerge in spring, larger every year. Why it's on the list. Lovage gives you year-round usability, leaves in spring and summer, seeds in fall, roots as needed from a single planting that never needs to be replaced. That's not a garden plant, that's food infrastructure. Number 11. Sorrel. The perennial green that comes back before anything else. Here's the problem with spring in a survival garden. Everything takes time. Asparagus needs to establish. Seedlings are fragile. The last frost window is stressful. But sorrel doesn't care about any of that. It's already up. Garden sorrel, Rumex acetosa, is one of the earliest perennial greens to emerge in spring, often pushing through frozen soil while everything else is still dormant. It's a low-growing, clump-forming perennial that produces tart, lemon-flavored leaves packed with vitamin C, iron, and potassium. In a scenario where your body has been running on stored food through a long winter, those nutrients arrive exactly when you need them most. Sorrel is cold hardy to zone 3. It tolerates poor acidic soil and grows in sun or partial shade. One established clump will produce fresh leaves from early March through November, without replanting, without fertilizing, and without any meaningful care. It doesn't bolt in summer heat the way spinach does. It just keeps producing. The flavor is sharp and citrusy, almost like lemongrass crossed with Swiss chard. Eat young leaves raw in salads. Cook older leaves into soups and sauces. Sorrel sauce over root vegetables is one of the oldest European peasant foods for a reason. Or blend it into a paste that stores for weeks. The vitamin C content alone makes it a critical crop for anyone relying on stored calories through winter. Planting is straightforward. Buy crowns or start from seed in early spring. Space plants 12 inches apart in a bed with decent drainage. Mulch lightly. Cut flower stalks before they set seed to keep the plant producing leaves rather than going reproductive. Every 3 to 4 years, divide the clumps to keep them vigorous. Why it's on the list. Sorrel is your early warning, early nutrition crop. Before your annual garden is even planted, sorrel is feeding you. That gap between stored food running low and the summer harvest coming in is one of the most dangerous windows in long-term food security. Sorrel fills it. Number 10. Groundnut vine, Hopness. The native perennial tuber that feeds itself. Before Europeans arrived in North America, indigenous peoples across the continent were eating a protein-dense tuber from a vinning perennial plant that grew wild in the forests and riverbanks. They didn't have to plant it, they just had to find it. Apios americana, commonly called Hopness or groundnut vine, is that plant, and it belongs in every serious perennial garden. Wait, this isn't the American groundnut from another list. This is the same species used differently. Here it's being counted separately because the point isn't just the protein, it's the ecological function. Hopness fixes nitrogen, climbs vertically, thrives in moist lowland areas where most crops fail, and produces tubers strung like beads along underground runners. Those tubers contain 15 to 17% protein by dry weight. Potatoes contain 2%. Sweet potatoes contain 1.5%. Hopness is in a category of its own for a root crop. Boil them, roast them, mash them. They taste nutty and slightly sweet like a protein-dense potato with a firmer texture. The plant is cold-hardy to zone 3, thrives in partial shade and moist soil, grows 6 to 10 feet tall on a fence or trellis, and spreads underground to form a permanent, expanding patch that produces more food every year without any replanting. In year 1 you get a handful. In year 3 you get pounds. In year 5 you have a self-sustaining system. Plant tubers 3 inches deep and 12 inches apart near a fence, tree, or sturdy trellis. Water regularly the first season. After that, a step back. Harvest in late fall when the vines die back. Always leave some tubers in the ground to regenerate. Why it's on the list. In a landscape where store-bought protein disappears first, Hopness gives you a ground-level self-renewing source that's been surviving North American winters without human help for thousands of years. Number 9. Hardy kiwi. The fruit vine that produces for 50 years. Most people hear kiwi and picture tropical growing conditions. That's the commercial kiwi. Hardy kiwi, Actinidia arguta, is a completely different animal. It's a cold, hardy perennial vine that survives temperatures down to -25 degrees Fahrenheit. Grows in zones 4 through 8 and produces hundreds of small grape-sized kiwi fruits per season once it's established. No fuzz, just sweet vitamin C-dense fruit you eat whole, skin and all. Here's the survival math. One mature hardy kiwi vine produces 50 to 100 pounds of fruit per year. You need 1 male plant per 8 female plants for pollination. But once that system is set up, those plants will produce for 50 years without replanting. That's not a garden plant. That's a permanent orchard asset. The fruit ripens in late summer and early fall, filling a window when your summer vegetables are winding down and your fall roots aren't ready yet. Fresh fruit in that window, high sugar, high vitamin C, dense calories, is exactly what a hard-working body needs before the cold sets in. They also store for weeks after harvest and can be dried or fermented. Planting requires patience. Hardy kiwi vines take 3 to 5 years to begin producing, and they need a sturdy structure, a pergola, a fence, a heavy trellis, because mature vines get enormous and heavy. But once they start, they don't stop. Prune in late winter to keep them manageable and to encourage fruiting wood. Mulch around the base. Fertilize with compost once a year in spring. Why it's on the list. Hardy kiwi is a long-game crop. It takes years to start producing, but once it does, it becomes one of the highest-yielding perennial fruits you can grow in a cold climate. Plant it now. It'll be producing long after annual fruit crops have come and gone. Number 8. Globe artichoke. The productive perennial that grows where others won't. Globe artichoke. Cinera scalamus looks like a luxury crop. Restaurants charge a premium for it. Supermarkets sell it for $3 to $5 per head. But the truth is that globe artichoke is one of the most productive, drought-tolerant, low-maintenance perennial food plants you can grow. And once established, it produces for 10 years or more without replanting. Here's what most people miss. Artichokes aren't just about the heart. The entire immature flower head is edible, and one mature plant produces 6 to 12 large heads per year, plus multiple smaller secondary buds on side shoots. That's more food per square foot than the most people realize from what they dismiss as a decorative garden plant. The plants grow 4 to 6 feet tall and wide. They're cold hardy to zone 6 and with mulching can survive into zone 5. They tolerate drought once established, grow in poor rocky soil, and actually prefer not being overwatered or over-fertilized. In neglect-friendly terms, artichokes are nearly impossible to kill once they're 2 years old. In a long-term food security scenario, artichoke hearts are calorie-dense, rich in fiber, vitamin C and K, folate, and antioxidants. They can be eaten fresh, preserved in oil, pickled, or dried. The leaves themselves have been used medicinally for liver support for centuries. Plant root divisions or transplants in early spring in full sun. Space them 4 to 6 feet apart. They need room. Mulch heavily around the base in fall and colder zones to protect the crown through winter. Cut the plant back to 12 inches after harvest season. In spring it comes back from the roots, stronger every year. Why it's on the list. Globe artichoke is a permanent food source that happens to be one of the most nutrient-dense things you can grow. It's drought-resistant, self-renewing, and productive enough to matter. Most gardeners overlook it because it looks fancy. Don't make that mistake. Number 7. Turkish rocket, the perennial brassica that produces when annuals fail. You've probably never heard of Turkish rocket Buneus orientalis. Most people haven't. But in parts of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, this perennial brassica has been a staple food for generations, and it belongs in the perennial survival garden for one clear reason. It produces edible greens from early spring through early summer in conditions that would destroy annual brassicas. Turkish rocket grows 2 to 3 feet tall, with deeply lobed dark green leaves that taste like a mild nutty arugula when young and more like broccoli rabe when mature. In early spring it produces edible flower buds that can be harvested and cooked exactly like broccoli, tender, slightly bitter, and packed with vitamins C, A, and K. It's cold hardy to zone 3. It tolerates poor soil, compacted soil, drought, and significant neglect. Once established, it self-seeds readily, meaning you essentially never need to replant it. The plant dies back in summer heat, comes back from the roots in fall for a second flush, and re-emerges in early spring before almost anything else is ready. This is exactly the kind of gap-filling crop that keeps a survival garden producing year-round. When your perennial kale is struggling in summer heat and your fall roots aren't ready yet, Turkish rocket gives you something green and nutritious to eat. Plant from seed in early spring or fall. Broadcast seed on bare, disturbed soil. It doesn't need careful planting. Once established, it takes care of itself. Thin aggressively to avoid overcrowding. Harvest young leaves and flower buds in spring before the plants bolt to full flower. Why it's on the list. Turkish rocket fills seasonal gaps that most perennials leave open. It's virtually indestructible, self-seeding, and productive in the shoulder seasons when fresh green food is hardest to find. Number 6. Multiplier onions, potato onions. The underground perennial that multiplies every year. Most people know you need to replant onions every year. Buy sets in spring, plant them, harvest in fall, and start over. Potato onions, also called multiplier onions, work on an entirely different system, and once you understand it, you'll never grow regular onions again. Potato onions, Allium cepa variety aggregatum, are a perennial bulbing onion that multiplies underground. You plant one bulb. By fall, it has divided into a cluster of 5 to 12 new bulbs. You harvest most of them to eat or store, replant the smallest ones, and the cycle continues indefinitely. No seeds required. No seed companies. Just a self-renewing bulb crop that expands every year. The flavor is mild and sweet, more like a shallot than a sharp storage onion. They store exceptionally well 6 to 12 months in a cool, dry location, giving you onion flavor through an entire year from a single summer harvest. The green tops are edible year-round like scallions, adding flavor and vitamin C to any meal. Multiplier onions are cold hardy to zone 3, tolerant of poor soil, and extremely drought-resistant once established. They grow in full sun or light shade and require almost no maintenance beyond planting and harvesting. Plant in fall, unlike most crops, pressing bulbs just below the soil surface, 6 inches apart. Mulch over them for winter. They emerge in early spring, grow through the season, and are ready to harvest when the tops fall over in midsummer. Cure them in a dry, shaded location for 2 weeks. Select the best small ones to replant in fall. Why it's on the list. Potato onions are the ultimate closed-loop food crop. Once you have them forever. No outside inputs, no seed dependency, and they give you one of the most universally useful flavoring and nutrient crops that exists. Number 5. Ostrich fern, the perennial fiddlehead that returns every spring without fail. Here's something most survival gardeners never consider. Ferns. Not for decoration for food. Ostrich fern, Matutia struthiopteris, produces the fiddlehead ferns that gourmet restaurants sell for $8 a bundle. But in a survival garden, those same fiddleheads are a free perennial spring vegetable that comes back every year in a spot where almost nothing else will grow. Ostrich fern thrives in shade, deep shade. The kind of shade under a tree canopy where sunlight barely reaches, where your vegetable garden is useless. That's where this fern makes its home, and it colonizes slowly, spreading by underground runners into a permanent, expanding patch that produces more fiddleheads every spring, without any help from you. Fiddleheads emerge in early spring sometimes, even before the last frost tightly coiled. Bright green, and packed with vitamins A and C, iron, potassium, and omega-3 fatty acids. Sauté them in oil, steam them briefly, or add them to stews. Never eat them raw in large quantities. Brief cooking neutralizes the compounds that can cause digestive issues. Each crown produces a cluster of fiddleheads once per year in spring. Harvest no more than half the fiddleheads from any single crown. Leave the rest to unfurl into fronds that feed the root system for next year's crop. The plants grow 3 to 5 feet tall by midsummer, providing dense, attractive ground cover through summer and fall. Plant crowns or divisions in early spring in moist, shaded soil. Keep them watered the first season. After that, they spread on their own, filling in difficult spots year after year. A stand of ostrich fern planted today will be 3 times the size in 5 years with zero effort. Why it's on the list. Ostrich fern turns your worst, darkest garden corners into productive food systems. It fills the spring hunger gap, requires zero maintenance, and colonizes ground that would otherwise produce nothing. Number 4. Scorzonera, the perennial root vegetable that gets better every year. Most root vegetables are annuals. Scorzonera hispanica is not. It's a perennial root crop with long black-skinned roots that taste like a cross between asparagus and oysters, mild, slightly sweet, distinctly savory. It's one of the most underused perennial vegetables in existence, and in a long-term survival context, it's exactly the kind of crop that makes the difference. Here's the key advantage. Annual root crops, carrots, beets, turnips, must be harvested and replanted every single year. Scorzonera can be left in the ground for 2, 3, even 4 years, getting larger and more calorie-dense the longer it grows. In year 1, you get a thin root. In year 3, you get a substantial, calorie-rich taproot that stores in the ground through winter and can be dug fresh as needed. It's cold-hardy to zone 3. It tolerates poor deep soil, which it actually prefers, developing its deep taproot without obstruction. It grows 2 to 3 feet tall, produces cheerful yellow flowers that are also edible, and self-seeds readily once established. One planting becomes a permanent stand. The nutritional profile is impressive, high in inulin, prebiotic fiber, potassium, and iron. Peel and cook roots just like parsnips. Roast, boil, steam, or slice raw into salads when young. The sap can discolor hands, so wear gloves while peeling. Sow seeds directly in deep, loosened soil in early spring, 1 inch deep, 6 inches apart. Thin to 12 inches. Mulch and water through the first season. After that, harvest as needed or leave roots in the ground to grow larger. Let a few plants flower and set seed each year to maintain and expand your stand. Why it's on the list. Scorzonera is a permanent ground storage root crop that gets better with age. In a scenario where you can't depend on annual planting, it gives you calorie-dense, nutritious food that stores itself in the ground and digs up on demand. Number 3. Watercress, the perennial superfood that grows where nothing else will. If you have a stream, a spring, a pond edge, a bog, or any consistently wet area on your property that you currently consider wasted ground, plant watercress there immediately. Nasturtium officinale is an aquatic perennial green that colonizes moving water and wet soil, produces continuous fresh greens year-round in mild climates, and is one of the most nutrient-dense vegetables in existence. Watercress is not a crop you tend. It's a crop you install and then harvest indefinitely. Once established in moving or consistently moist water, it spreads by stem fragments and roots wherever conditions allow, creating a permanent self-maintaining green bed that requires no planting, no weeding, and no maintenance of any kind. The nutrition profile is extraordinary. Watercress contains more vitamin C per ounce than an orange, more calcium than milk by weight, and significant amounts of vitamin K, vitamin A, iron, and beta-carotene. Gram for gram, it's one of the most nutrient-dense foods you can grow, critical in a long-term scenario where micronutrient deficiency becomes a real threat. Harvest by snipping stems with scissors. They regrow from the cut in days. Eat fresh in salads, wilted into soups, or blended into a nutrient-dense paste. In cold climates, watercress slows in winter but often survives under ice in running water, coming back vigorously in early spring when little else is producing. Plant cuttings or transplants directly into the mud at the edge of a stream or wet area. Press them into the bank and let the water do the rest. In still water or container setups, keep the water slightly moving. A small pump is enough. In wet soil without standing water, simply keep the area consistently moist. Why it's on the list. Watercress turns your worst, wettest, most unproductive ground into a perpetual nutrition machine. Once it's established, you can't stop it. In a long-term scenario where fresh greens are the first thing to disappear, watercress just keeps growing. Number 2, comfrey. The perennial powerhouse that feeds your entire garden. Comfrey symphytum officinale, or more specifically, the sterile hybrid Bocking 14, is not primarily a food crop, but it belongs near the top of this list because, in a long-term food production system, comfrey does something no vegetable on earth can match. It turns subsoil minerals into surface-level fertility, continuously, for free, forever. Here's how it works. Comfrey develops a deep taproot that can reach 6 to 8 feet underground, pulling up mineral nutrients, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, nitrogen from layers of soil that your vegetable roots can never reach. Those minerals accumulate in the leaves. When you cut those leaves and lay them around other plants, the minerals transfer directly into the topsoil as they decompose. In gardening terms, this is called dynamic accumulation, and comfrey is better at it than any other plant. In a collapse scenario where fertilizer supply chains have broken down and your soil is getting depleted season after season, comfrey becomes the most important plant in your garden. 3 to 4 cuts of comfrey leaves per season, laid as mulch around your vegetable beds, replaces a significant portion of the fertility inputs those beds need. But comfrey is also edible. Young leaves can be cooked like spinach. They're very high in protein and B vitamins, though they should be eaten in moderation rather than as a primary food. The real value is systemic. It keeps your entire garden productive when external inputs aren't available. Plant root cuttings or crowns in spring. Bocking 14 is sterile, meaning it won't spread invasively by seed, only by root division, which you control. Once planted, comfrey is essentially permanent. It regrows from even small root fragments. One plant becomes the cornerstone of a self-fertilizing food system. Why it's at number 2. Comfrey doesn't just feed you, it feeds your entire garden. In a long-term scenario where soil fertility is the real limiting factor, comfrey is what keeps everything else on this list productive. It's not a luxury, it's infrastructure. Number 1. Sunchokes with a perennial companion system. The set-it-and-forget-it calorie engine. Everything on this list is valuable, but if you could only plant one thing, one crop that would keep you fed through collapse, drought, neglect, and whatever else the long-term brings, this is it. Jerusalem artichoke, Helianthus tuberosus, also called sunchoke, is the most complete survival crop that exists. Not because it's the most nutritious, not because it's the tastiest, but because when you combine its specific set of qualities, nothing else matches it for raw, long-term food production with zero inputs. Let's go through the survival math. One tuber planted in spring becomes 5 to 10 pounds of tubers by fall. Those tubers stay in the ground through winter. Your root cellar is the earth itself. You dig them up fresh as needed, even in snow-covered ground. You leave some behind and they regenerate next year naturally, without replanting. Each year the patch expands. Each year the yield increases. By year 5, a 10-foot by 10-foot patch is producing over 100 pounds of calorie-dense tubers annually with zero inputs and zero labor beyond the digging. Sunchokes are native to North America, cold-hardy to Zone 3, drought-tolerant, sun-loving. and will grow in almost any soil, including rocky, compacted, nutritionally depleted soil that would fail most crops. They grow 6 to 10 feet tall, producing cheerful yellow sunflower-like blooms in late summer that attract pollinators to every other crop in your garden. And because they're in the sunflower family, they provide partial shade and wind protection to shorter crops planted nearby. The tubers taste mildly sweet and nutty, somewhere between a water chestnut and a potato. Roast them whole in coals. Slice them raw into salads. Mash them. Ferment them. They're high in inulin fiber, potassium, and B vitamins. Here's why this entry is number 1 rather than just another crop on the list. The companion system. Plant sunchokes on the northern edge of your garden to act as a windbreak. Plant comfrey on the perimeter to provide fertility. Plant nitrogen-fixing perennial legumes like clover or groundnut in the understory. You've just built a permanent, self-maintaining food ecosystem that produces calories, greens, nitrogen, and fertility simultaneously, and none of it requires replanting, fertilizing, or significant effort once it's established. That's the real point of this entire list. It's not about individual crops. It's about building a system. A perennial system that runs on sunlight, rain, and soil, with no external inputs, no supply chain dependency, and no annual reset. The people who survive long-term instability aren't the ones who panic and stockpile. They're the ones who had the foresight to build living systems 2 and 3 years before they needed them. Perennials take time to establish. That's the one non-negotiable truth. If you wait until the problem is obvious, you're already behind. The right time to plant was years ago. The second best time is now, while you can still source crowns, cuttings, tubers, and divisions before everyone else realizes what they should have been doing all along. 12 crops, 1 planting, years, sometimes decades of food. That's not gardening as a hobby. That's a permanent food supply that keeps working whether you're paying attention or not. Which crop are you starting with? Drop it in the comments. And if you're serious about building food security that doesn't depend on a system that can break, subscribe now, because this channel is about building systems that outlast whatever's coming, not reacting when it's too late.